Do you know how many times you have to teach about reverence to get people to be more reverent? 1,000. And if this is about Jesus and authentic worship, is that too much?
Yeah.
I don't think so. This is Dan and Jordan Burke. Welcome to Divine Intimacy Radio. We're continuing a conversation today. We started with Dennis McNamara on reverence. And our first show we did with him, he's an expert on liturgy. The discussion we had with Dennis was architecture matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how, and it either tells the truth about what's happening in the Mass, or it lies, distorts, or sort of, diminishes those truths. So we talked a little bit about that. As a follow-on, I wanted to talk about lies today that about liturgical reverence or reverence in liturgy. And reverence is both something that priests, of course, have a huge effect on, but the laity have a huge effect on as well.
Can I offer one plug so that people go back and listen to that show?
Yeah.
So we talked about this, and I thought, as I was thinking about this after the show, a question popped up in my mind, and I wanted to put it out there to priests and say, if you're a priest, go to the front of your parish, pretend that you've never been there before, and ask yourself, if I didn't know anything about the church, if I didn't know anything about the Catholic faith, and I walked into this building for the first time, would my church as a priest speak the truth of what is happening here? Look around and see. Because, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but unfortunately there are many churches out there, Catholic churches out there, who the only difference between that parish and a Protestant parish, in my estimation, is that we actually have Jesus on the cross. But outside of that, there's really no visible difference, which is quite unfortunate. So I would challenge any of the priests listening to this, and even the laity. Maybe this is an exercise that you can do. And if you're looking for ways to give back to your parish and to your priest, and you find that, oh no, I've gone to the front of my parish and I can't really tell the difference, maybe that will inspire you to say, hey, I'd love to donate some money towards a statue, or, some artwork or some icons or anything like that. So just want to throw that out there. The deeper discussion, as you stated, we already had with Dennis McNamara, and you can find that on all of our channels.
Yeah, I think, I think I'd like to start with the first lie, kind of leaving off what we talked about with Dennis, and that is that architecture doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to a church that I visited in southern Florida. I think it was Naples, Florida. I don't remember the name of the church. But Stephanie and I walked in. We were traveling and speaking, and walked in, and it was a church in the round, which tells the lie that that we are more important. In my opinion, it tells the lie architecturally that looking at each other is more important than looking at Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional architecture of the church is cruciform. The altar is facing east. Jesus is on the crucifix. And the center of our worship is Jesus, not us, or not. And it tries to architecturally highlight a truth, and that is that Jesus is in you. But when we go to Mass, we're there to worship Jesus.
Right.
I'm not there to worship Jesus in you. I'm there to worship Jesus. I'm there to participate in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So church in the round is an architecture that in my opinion lies in some respects, but in this church in particular was horrific. It had a wireframe corpus coming out of a skylight, and of course the wireframe means that there are no visible, other than a vague
like outline
of a human,
right? Just
vague though. Yeah. Of course, that there's no blood, it's not a true corpus or crucifix, but he's coming down on the altar, and there's some good symbolism they were looking for there, but the way they did it just looks like some dude parachuting out of the sky.
Yeah, and if there's anyone who's listening and thinking, well, that's a subjective opinion, we need to also note that there is an objective reality of beauty. There's objective beauty.
Yeah.
And Father Ripperger actually gives a phenomenal talk talking about the psychology and theology of what objective beauty is.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to note that to say essentially, while there will be some personal opinions in here,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to things like that, what is and isn't objectively beautiful, that is a defined truth, and that is not your opinion. That is something that is, in this case, that is just not objectively beautiful.
Yeah, what you like may or may not be relevant to what is appropriate architecture.
Right.
The architecture has to tell the truth doctrinally about what's going on. Jesus wasn't a ghost, as the wireframe, image kind of hints at. He was real. He was literal. He was crucified on the cross, and that particular corpus is more akin to a Docetist heresy of the first century, where Jesus was a spirit and not fully God, fully human. So I would call that heretical. The second element of the parish, which was alarming. I actually have photos of this, and I need to put up a post on it. But I was looking for the tabernacle, and I because it's in the round, there's no directionality to the place, and I discovered it, and what I discovered was horrifying. So the sanctuary was in the center and it was elevated. The tabernacle wasn't in the sanctuary. It was down at the same level as the nave, typically where the parishioners sit and worship, sit, stand, and kneel. And it was just a door in this weird looking construct that it was almost like a house. And there was a guy, if you can picture, leaning up against it with his right elbow. The tabernacle's right behind his right shoulder, talking to another person with a stroller. What does that architecture say? Ain't nothing important going on here.
Right.
Hang out as you will.
Right.
God is not there, because we wouldn't act this way if we thought he was.
Right.
So this architecture is saying the presence of Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, is almost meaningless, slightly elevated by the golden door, but it's down at the level of the people. It's not in the sanctuary, separated heaven, right? And it's so architecturally banal that somebody could just lean up against right next to it and just have a, shoot in the breeze about whatever. So, I mean, that's probably the worst architecture I've ever seen. But that leads into this other area, and that is that I've seen good priests who I have respect for believe, act, think, whatever sequence makes sense, about the architecture and the way things are done in the Mass in ways that detract from what they even say they believe. So I'll give you an example. One was, I had a conversation with a priest in a very large parish that had a lot of people coming in and out of it, and the main group is there, and then there's people who travel and all that. And I said, we really need to have a statement before Mass, because I always sit up front. So I see people who walk up who don't know what they're doing.
Right. And
then they're given communion. And I don't get that. If anyone ever acts weird,
I've chased down someone,
right.
I'm sure you probably have. And chased down, I say nicely. I tapped the guy on the shoulder. He had no clue. It wasn't malicious. And I just kind of talked to him very kindly, and we solved the situation. But yeah, that's to your point.
Yeah. So I sometimes I watch and I shouldn't, and I see these weird actions, and I'm thinking that, in quotes, extraordinary minister should not have given communion to that. They're clearly not Catholic. They don't know what they're doing.
Right.
We need a statement at the beginning of Mass that says, if you're not Catholic, you're welcome, but you can't receive the Eucharist,
right?
Because we love you.
We'll give you a blessing.
Yeah. And I'm not, that's, by the way, that act isn't found nowhere in the liturgy or
the blessing.
Yeah. Or if you are not a believer, it's not, that's a different subject, but just as an FYI, it's not found anywhere. There's no liturgical guidelines that I'm aware of that say, yeah. So, but anyway, but the point is, so I said, I'd be happy to create a statement according to the teachings of the church that say, you're welcome, but you can't receive. EWTN does that at their masses. And I was working at EWTN at the time. And the priest said to me something was very, very telling. Very good priest, by the way. He said, it won't work. And I was, it was one of those shoulder droop moments, sigh moments, like, okay, all right. And I just knew, it wasn't going to go in a good direction. And so I yielded. But there's a lie so that's a lie. It won't work. Now, there is a truth in it and a lie in it. By itself, a statement like that is not going to solve the abuse of the Eucharist by people who don't believe.
Right.
That's true. In conjunction with a lot of other things that should be constantly going on in a parish, it will help. And so not doing it does harm. Doing it, reading a statement like that, does help, but it has to be done in conjunction with many other things. We're about ready to hit the break, but I want to talk about those many things.
We don't have breaks on this one, so we can just keep going.
Oh, we do. Oh, so I don't have to worry about that.
You don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
My question would have been, define not work.
Right.
Because if this is a game of percentages, for lack of a better term, let's say that, okay, yes, there's still going to be people who are going to come up and receive, who have no idea what they're doing, who haven't been to confession and who knows how long, and they're receiving mortal sin, which I did. I'm not condemning anyone. I'm painfully aware of it because I did it.
Yeah.
Because it's horrific. So that's still going to happen. But if there's 0.1% of people who then choose to receive more reverently or more appropriately, or who go to confession, is that not a major win? I mean, Scripture even says that the heavens rejoice over one person who is turned away from their sin. I'm totally misquoting that.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I'm not, I don't know the priest. I'm not saying this to knock him or anything. It just, hearing it from the other side, it's a very defeatist attitude.
It is a very defeatist attitude.
And it's like, well, you're the protector of
Jesus.
And
the souls of the people receiving.
And if maybe this is just my cop background, but it was like, if I can do one little thing to make sure that some horrific thing doesn't happen, and it's so low effort, why would I not do that?
Exactly. That's a great argument. It's a very low effort thing. It takes a second to read a statement like that. I think that, it's the perfect being the enemy of the good, right? So one statement won't solve the whole problem, so I'm not going to do the one statement. But to your argument, if it keeps one person from receiving when they shouldn't, that's one less desecration of the Lord, because that's what it is. When a person receives in a state of mortal sin, it is a sacrilege.
Right.
It is a grave sin against the Lord, and it does damage to the soul of the person. So if you love the person and you love the Lord, it seems to me you should be motivated to do 1,000 little things that help to make sure people come forward properly and receive communion.
Right.
So this is to my next point. Culture. This is how I define culture. It's the collective beliefs and values of any group of people as expressed in the way they live. The collective beliefs and values of any people as expressed in the way they live. What is the way people express the way they live in the church today? How do we know? Well, we can watch it. We can observe it. We can see people being very irreverent or very reverent. We can see that. Surveys tell us what they believe, and usually what they believe is how they live. Not always, but it's very common. And so we have surveys that are very bad that say most people don't believe. Mm-hmm. And
specifically in the real presence of the Eucharist.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Most people don't believe. So I think it would be very foolish for any particular priest or any leader in any church, a Catholic church of any, to assume, their parish is different than all the other parishes.
Right.
that data doesn't apply to them. Well, so what if yours is better? What if half of them believe? It means half of them don't.
Right.
Now, what does that mean about half of them receiving communion?
Yeah. Half of them are committing sacrilege, essentially.
Right.
Which is not even, and I want to note, we're not saying those people bad.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, oh gosh, that is the Lord.
Let's think about
being
this.
Desecrated.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a cry of the heart. Because like I said, that's why I said that I did it when I was at my worst and I had no concept of what was actually happening.
Yeah.
And I wish someone, I don't know, I mean, you guys did your best, but I was off in my own land at that time. I wish I had heard a homily that had explained it so that I knew that what I was doing. So I didn't suffer later on thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many times I did that. You know what I mean? So it's not, there's no condemnation of the people who are doing that action. It's more so of we love Jesus.
Yeah.
We desire Jesus in the Eucharist. We desire that he is held to the utmost reverence. And he is, I got to imagine that he's in the back of the church just weeping. That's me.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can think of him.
It's horrific. It's so, and to your point, the priest that I am, not the church in the round, what I heard was that there was a new priest there and he was kind of a victim of this whole thing. But the one I was talking about who said that won't work is a really exceptional priest.
Yeah.
Liturgically and in many ways. But I guess one of the blessings I have is my background is in organizational development. I've managed multiple global entities. I still do that now. And you've worked in the context that I lead. And I think you can attest to the fact that we have a very unified team.
Yeah.
We're very clear about our values and why we do what we do. There's a reason for that. And the reason it's like that is because I know that I need to tell you, reinforce in you and everyone in the team in a million different ways what this is all about. And that is not done in parishes.
Right.
So will one statement that says, if you're not a Catholic, please remain in your pew, you're welcome here. If we gave you the Eucharist, we would be inviting you to commit a sin, and we love you and we don't want you to do that against the Lord or yourself. 1 Corinthians 11:27. Will that statement stop? No. Will it with 1,000 other messages? You darn well better believe it will.
Yeah.
Will it perfectly? No, that's just not possible. People are not perfect. But if there's a plaque at I love the little stands, before you enter into the nave, which is the place where Catholics sit, kneel, and pray, that say silence. This is a place of reverence and focus on Jesus. Please turn your phones off and remain in perfect silence. Whatever. I love those things.
Yeah.
That's a message. Don't receive the Eucharist. That's a message. The architecture is a message. Church in the round, it's all about you. That's the message. Come in, yap all you want, whatever.
Well, there's no order to it, which I find interesting because the entirety of our faith and Jesus and is all about order, right? Rightly ordered things and things within an order.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that as you were describing the Church of the Round, and I thought, well, of course people don't understand there's no order.
Yeah.
Nothing is pointing to this is the Holy of Holies.
Right.
This is the most important thing in the church. This is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just kind of chaotic and, well, I'll figure it out and I'll show up. And, I've heard this with kids or with parents with young kids who go from the ordinary form to the traditional Latin Mass. And I'm not making any comments on either of them. I'm just telling what I've heard.
Yeah.
They said that when they brought their kids, for the most part, because kids are kids, from ordinary form to Latin Mass, they start behaving better over time. Why is that? Because there's a lot of order there. Right. Everyone is ordered to one thing. The church, the architecture is ordered to one thing.
And it's not about you there. It's about Jesus and you coming to Jesus. Certainly your salvation, but the focus is on us worshiping God.
Right.
Yeah. So I would just say to our beloved priests out there, if you want to increase reverence and you want people to believe, the architecture needs to say that there's something special going on here. Statements before Mass, little sign, there's a million ways. There needs to be formation about it, and not just once. I mean, I used to work for a guy who was a brilliant leader, but his number one weakness was he thought if he said it once, everybody ought to know it and get it and follow it. And that is just radically contrary to human nature. Do you know how many times you have to teach about reverence to get people to be more reverent? 1,000, right? And if this is about Jesus and authentic worship, is that too much?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, you're reminding me now. So we had recently interestingly enough, I don't know what it was, 2 different parishes, 2 different homilies that the priest mentioned or talked about in some way, people talking before and after Mass, immediately before and immediately after Mass, and kind of bemoaning the fact that this happens. And what's fascinating to me, when you just said what you said, it reminded me of the concept of extreme ownership, which I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's something that I've implemented as a manager here.
Describe it.
So extreme ownership, if no one's ever heard of it, is a process that was coined by Jocko Willink, who was a Navy SEAL. It's an amazing TED Talk on this very thing. And it's essentially, it's a flipping of understanding when it comes to managing and teaching and leading people, primarily leading people, especially in this context, priests leading people, managers leading people. And what it says is, if something goes wrong, I can't assume that it's on them first.
I totally agree with that.
I have to assume that I didn't train them well enough or provide them with what they needed.
I have failed them.
I have failed them.
If I'm managing a system and people in that system and they do the wrong thing, the first thing I have to ask is, and I used to do this, but I never read or anything of Jocko, I've just listened to you, but this is my practice. Have I trained them right? Yes. Do they have the right measures in place?
Right.
Do they have all the tools that they need? How am I reinforcing what I've asked them to do?
Right.
Is there anything I'm doing that's contradictory? I start ticking off all those boxes. Now, if I tick all those boxes and they're still behaving, contrary, then they don't fit in the organization. Well, but most of the time you're going to solve the problems.
Right. And then and at the very least, especially in this case, then okay, I've done everything I can. My hands are clean.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, let's also be clear, not to scare anybody, but priests especially will have to answer for their flock. Right?
Yeah.
To some extent.
Oh, to a great extent.
Yeah.
Any leader,
right.
Scripture's clear. You, by the way, will incur a stricter judgment because you're teaching right now.
Listen, that's one of the, there's about 3 or 4 different scripture verses that constantly rotate in the back of my head, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
It's constantly in the back of my head. But as a driver of goodness and a safety block, so to speak, to make sure that I'm not going off the rails. So keeping that in mind, you're going to have to answer for your flock. But at least you can have some peace that if you've done all those things, if you step back and you ask yourself, as I've asked myself, okay, this wasn't completed. The outcome was not what I expected. What did I do wrong first?
Yeah.
Was I not clear?
Yeah.
How do I make it so that this person achieves what they desire to achieve and what I need them to achieve,
right,
or what I desire them to achieve?
Yeah.
That is a huge shift in mindset that really helps kind of tie all this together in a way. So I don't know.
No, but you're heading towards, you had a situation where you heard a homily. This is all set up for that.
Yeah. So, again, from what I know of, one priest I know very well, and I know he's an amazing priest. The other one I don't know at all.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's a great priest.
Yeah. That's generally
from the little things
default.
that I've heard. I'm basically just saying I've known this one priest for a very long time. This other one, I kind of know cursory from my homily here and there. And from everything I could tell, he's solid, right?
Yeah.
Clearly believes. And he was bemoaning the fact that there was people talking before and after Mass. And it was fascinating. And I loved the homily. It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting to me is that after the Mass, the only people who were talking were the extraordinary ministers. That was it.
Yeah.
Everyone else was like, you could almost, I don't know, you were there.
Yeah.
It almost felt like the congregation was like, ooh, yeah, I need to be careful.
And then the very people that are closest to the pastor,
Right.
under his direct authority relative to what happens, and they're yapping it up. Yeah, I remember that. I almost smacked my forehead so hard I would have had to go into an ambulance.
Yeah.
Just like, what is going on here?
And again, this is no judgment, clearly no judgment on the priest. This is no judgment on those ladies. It's more of it's like, imagine again, if you're someone who doesn't know anything about the faith, and they're maybe feeling like they want to go check out the Catholic Church, and that's what they see.
Yeah.
What does that tell them? They're not serious.
Or it's the same as a Protestant church.
Right. Like, what's the difference?
There's nothing special about this space. There's nothing going on here that's different than in a Protestant space. I just happen to like the Catholic version of church.
Right.
Which is the way most people by the data see it.
And I think I may be recalling incorrectly, but I almost am certain that he even said the Protestantization. I don't know.
He used that exact phrase.
Yeah.
He said, is it because we Protestantized, something like that, our experience?
And he's dead on.
But what's interesting is then change it.
Yeah.
Because I think I agree with you. I have no doubt that priest is Orthodox. I've heard enough homilies to know that he loves the faith, and he's, but in that same homily, he also got mad. I mean, anyone listening would receive it as and he said something like, you haven't changed me. I still believe. I'm, what, I don't know what that was about, but the point is that he was clearly upset because he believes Jesus is present and people are acting irreverently. Well, the architecture of the church is Protestant. There's no distinction between the nave and the sanctuary.
Yeah.
There's no, you got drums off in the corner. Thank God I've never heard them every time I've been there. They haven't been used. I'm thinking, it'd be great for someone to get rid of those. The music, very Protestant, not in any way distinctively Catholic. After Mass, you have this absolutely ear-piercing. It's like when people are supposed to be praying because they actually met Jesus, what do we hear? Now we're going to do announcements. No. And from the sanctuary, and it's incredibly loud. You can't pray. And just his voice and the kind of the way the audio works there, it's very tinny. It's like what you're doing. So good priest, what you're doing
what you just said
contradicts what you believe. Right. And I don't know why they don't see it.
Right.
I don't know why they don't see it. The way that people there are taught to receive communion, there's no way to kneel. I think, frankly, I'll just be honest, and I don't mean to offend any of our priest friends. We have so many that listen to the show. We always tell people to care for your priest, love them, encourage them, give them all your money, whatever. But when you don't provide a kneeler for people who want to do what is the universal norm in the church, as taught by Memoriale Domini, the very document that allowed for communion in the hand, that specifically says you should not impede the universal norm if people want to exercise that approach, it's uncharitable to make them kneel on the floor, because a kneeler there doesn't inhibit anyone.
So now, okay, so I totally agree. I want to be super sensitive to the priests that are listening. And I think that, number one, there might be people out there who are thinking, well, you're moving the goalposts because you just said that priest should say something, and then you said that he gave an awesome homily and he said something and you're not happy. That's not at all what we're saying.
No.
What we're saying is there are many different things that can and should be done that would help, that would supplement that homily.
Right.
So that it would be way more impactful.
And there are many things that contradict the homily.
Correct.
Under the control of the priest, at least in my assumption, but maybe he doesn't have freedom, for instance, to put in an altar rail.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to note is to be super sensitive, because we know many priests who are in positions to where they cannot do anything to their parish because someone in hierarchy will not allow them to.
Sure.
So, I'm coming back to this part of being very sensitive to that,
to the
reality.
priest's limitations.
Yeah. And so maybe and you probably have way more ideas than I do for this, but because I don't think I actually have any.
Yeah.
So this is more of a question. So for those who are limited in that capacity,
Yeah.
and who are hearing this and who have said, you know what, this has already been on my heart for a long time, and this is just reinforcing what's been on my heart. This discussion is just reinforcing what's been on my heart. But I have limitations. What are things that they can do? I mean, we listed starting, giving a brief note before Mass starts.
Well, I would say start with in the before the nave, as people enter in, or right as they enter in. This is a place of silence and reverence. Please respect people's desire to pray and to worship.
Mm.
Keep fellowship outside, whatever you want to say. It starts there. There could be tracts in the which a lot of churches have, about reverence and silence and reinforcing what you want to see in the parish.
There's a beautiful card, I think it was St. Francis potentially, who walked through the Mass, and every aspect of the Mass, from the laity walking in to the priest walking in, is reflective of part of Jesus's passion. And I've loved those. I think if you gave those to people and they recognize what's actually going on,
put them in the pews.
Yeah.
We've commissioned a book called A Devotional Journey into the Mass by Christopher Carstens. We just started a film series on that'll be out sometime soon. Also with Father Boniface Hicks, and he, The Hidden Power of Silence in the Mass. Give these books out to your parish, right? Stop reading the stupid announcements from the sanctuary. Step out of the sanctuary, or just send them in flock note.
Yeah.
Every parish ought to be using flock note.
Yeah.
And everyone ought to be, you don't need to say it and if people miss it, what would the answer will be, well, they'll miss it then. Yeah, but if you keep saying it, you're training them not to look at flock note at your parish email system, whatever that is. So train them to actually, so they'll miss some things and say, oh, I'm sorry you missed that. It was in the email. Oh, you didn't. Oh, okay. Well, here's how you make sure you get the email, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of announcements from essentially the pulpit, appeals from the pulpit, that's got to stop. That's got to stop.
That's ridiculous.
Because it's, as we've been talking about the architecture and what you're doing, representing what you believe, when you have someone coming up there, and I know it doesn't happen all the time, at least not for us.
It's once a year, yeah.
But, so-and-so wants to make an appeal for something, and now we're sitting through a slideshow, and it's like, for me,
it's saying this is not sacred space.
Number one, but number two, Mass I just consumed our Lord.
Right.
I want to sit and pray and contemplate. And now I have to listen to a surprise slideshow, and I'm being held hostage.
Right.
Because the Mass isn't over. I can't leave.
No, that's exactly why they do it too.
So that's really problematic and disturbing on many levels. So that's another thing that you can think about changing.
So read Sacrosanctum Concilium, read Musicum Sacrum, and ask yourself the question, what does this say it ought to look like? And does it look like that? I was just reading, for some reason, Boniface Hicks drew my attention to the liturgy of the hour, the general instruction of the liturgy of the hours. And it says in there that there should be a pause in between the three psalms that you read at each of the hours, right? Mm-hmm. And the antiphon is kind of the trigger to what you should be meditating related to that. And I realize we're pretty reverent in our use of the liturgy here, of our liturgy of the hours, but we don't pause well enough there. And so I'm going to make a change. So somebody sent something to my attention. I did this with a very good priest, friend of ours, and I said, church document says that the communion paten should be retained. And the next Mass I was at, he was using it, and I said, thank you for doing it. He said, I saw in your face that you like that. I mean, he's reverent, but he can't think of everything, and he's got too many things to do, just like so many priests do. They're overworked, but it's just even late. And I have even paid for patents for churches. I've donated to have an altar rail installed,
So you just segued perfectly into what the note I was writing. A lot of this has been talking, to priests, so to speak, and trying to give them ideas of ways that they can help their flock come to a deeper realization of what's occurring in the Mass. Now, there's a lot of laity who listen to the show, and I would challenge them you must help your priest.
Must.
Because as
There's
you
way
just
more
said,
you than them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Because as you just said, they're busy, they're overworked. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many priest friends that I have who are priests of multiple parishes. They're always running around. In order to implement something like this is near impossible. So time, talent, and treasure.
Yeah.
Of course, you're donating to your church, but time and talent are two other things. If you can donate the tracts that we were talking about, the
Yeah.
brochures that we're talking about,
Yeah.
books
Yeah.
on these topics, if you're crafty and you can create something,
Yeah.
you have a laser engraver. I've been laser engraving a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
If you got a laser engraver or a CNC machine and you want to create a beautiful sign that says silence, you're entering into the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
And give that to your priest, do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally agree.
These are beautiful ways for the laity to serve not just the priest, but the parish, and helping the priest better serve them.
And encourage and support the priest at every step he makes in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because so many priests want to do all these things, and they have a bunch of loudmouth, people who are not converted and who think the parish church is a social institution rather than a divine one. And they want to bend it to the world. And so when the priest preaches on something that's true and important and good, they get blasted, and the faithful don't say anything.
Right.
Say something.
Right.
I heard a recent homily on where a priest was expressing his belief in the Eucharist. I sent him a note, said, thank you so much for doing that. I want to give another example that was a little bit shocking to me. And this priest is retired, so, he presided over for a long, long time, more than a decade, a parish that in the particular diocese that it's in is easily the most irreverent parish. It was so bad in terms of how the Lord is given to the people, how people dress. I mean, you could easily see mini skirts are close to it, flip-flop. It's that church that all of those people who honestly are probably good people yet to be really converted and realize what it means to follow Jesus. And he one day lamented in his homily that people didn't believe in the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. Another moment where I wanted to smack my forehead so hard I'd have to be, sent to the hospital, as I wanted to say, but Father, you preach 3 homilies at every Mass. Your message is, what you have to say is more important than what's going on the altar.
Right.
But Father, you allow very sloppy practices related to the Eucharist. Father, there are no standards in your parish at all. Yeah. You don't teach or preach that Jesus is truly present. You never, until that homily. I, because of the timing, like where I went to work, and that was the church I had to attend a lot. Never heard him teach on it. And I want to say, back to that guy who was a great leader, but thought that he could say something once. You can't, there's another good priest. This is an example. Before him was a heretical priest who was deeply loved. Heretical priest. A very problematic priest. Sorry about that language.
So to clarify, he was a priest that did actually teach things contrary and heretical to church teaching.
Right. And one of them was, you don't have to go to confession.
Right.
Well, I've heard this priest who's trying to resolve this preach, I think 2 or 3 very good homilies on confession. And because he's a good priest, every day before Mass, he's available for confession. So he's living his priestly life. Everybody goes forward for communion. Mm-hmm. There are a few of us who go to confession.
Yeah.
And it's not changing. But the reason it's not changing is because you can't just say it a few times in a homily.
Yeah.
What you may have to do is find a good tract, a good, document, and put it on every pew and say, we're going to take 10 minutes before Mass and I want to tell you about this and walk you through it. Survey the parish, find out why they don't go, because for instance, if they were lied to and believed that, why did they believe it? Well, okay, do you believe that you sin? Yes, I believe that I sin. You could ask them that. Mm-hmm. They can answer. Okay, if you believe you sin, and it's an even more grave sin to go to receive communion if it's a mortal sin. And do you go to confession? Well, no, because well, how are you forgiven of that sin? Digging into doing the work of digging into what they believe instead of just letting them go to hell. And I love this priest, and I'm not accusing. I'm just struggling with it.
Yeah.
Instead of just letting them go to hell, dig in, teach over. We hold people hostage for the stupid announcements at the end of every Mass. Hold them hostage for teaching on the church at the beginning of Mass. So do the procession. Say, before Mass begins, I just want to spend 5 minutes talking, and stay out of the sanctuary, whatever, teach it. Send out the teachings over and over and until you see the change.
Yeah.
Have individual meetings with people and say, hey, I haven't, you come forward every week, and I love you, and this is what 1 Corinthians 11:27 says, and I want to make sure, are you cool? I'm not accusing you of anything, but just want to make sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what a priest and a leader and a shepherd of a flock is supposed to do. I remember when I first really came back to the church in my reversion, I ended up going to the traditional Latin Mass for the first time, and I was stunned to see the priest who taught on these things in his homilies constantly. I learned more from his homilies about the faith and the church and theology than I learned anywhere else.
Why don't you just say the priest's name? Because
Father Mackey. Amazing.
Huntsville.
In Huntsville.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Alabama.
What's funny is I became known as the guy who took notes. I actually had someone who reached out to me and said, you look like this guy who went to this parish I went to who's constantly taking notes in the front row. I was like, yeah, that was me. Because he's that good.
Yeah.
But specifically, one of the things that really kind of blew my mind was that he straight up said multiple times, hey, we're having this, let's say, for young boys altar server training. I know all of you and all of your families. So, I know what's going on. If you're not here, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't threatening him or anything, but he was denoting this level of knowledge of his flock. I know every one of you. I know what's happening in your lives because I'm your pastor and I'm supposed to care and I want you to get to heaven. So we're doing this.
Yes.
Right? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think a lot of people crave, I know we do, I think speaking for both of us, crave that leadership.
Yeah.
That rightly ordered good leadership.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, the world has kind of flipped this dynamic of the laity and the priest is more subservient to the laity. And that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Which just goes back to your point of we have to assist our priests. We have to thank them for the good that they're doing. We have to go to them and say, I see you're trying. How can I help you succeed? It's making me emotional thinking about it because, man, there's so many priests out there who are suffering.
Yeah.
Who are alone.
Yeah.
Alone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They
have and beat up on. Right.
Beat up on.
Yeah.
Because the majority or the minority of the unconverted, unfortunately, actually, it's probably the majority of the unconverted are the loudest.
Yeah.
And the faithful are quiet.
Yeah.
And man, that if you're listening and you're one of those people, as I've been one of those people, you should feel condemnation.
Yeah. Yeah. Open your stupid mouth and your wallet and help your priest.
Right. And to use that harsh language, because you should. Like I've noted it. And it's such a tragedy. We can't have these conversations without also noting, as we have been, the reality of the suffering that these priests go through, the hardships that they go through, the battle that they're up against, and not addressing the facts, the ways that we need to assist them in that.
All right. So let's outline the lies.
Okay.
To bring this to a conclusion. One of the lies is I only need to say it once, and if they're not going to follow, they're not going to follow. That's a lie. You got to say it over and over and over again in 1,000 different ways.
And to put a bullet point under that, the enemy is going to tell you, well, that didn't work.
Right.
If you're going to try it once,
right,
you're not going to see the results you want.
No, this is a multi-year process of changing the collective beliefs and values of people in the culture, people in the parish. And what was the Latin phrase that we were talking about?
Lex orandi, lex credendi,
lex vivendi.
Lex vivendi, yeah.
Yeah, how you pray.
As we worship, so we believe, so we live.
Right. So you got to tell them in 1,000 ways, tracts, free books, Devotional Journey into the Mass, just to make another one known, by Christopher Carstens, available at SpiritualDirection.com.
And by the way, sorry, I know
Yeah.
you're on a thing, but many of these amazing publishers like Sophia,
Yeah.
they do bulk
Discounts.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm trying to get this from the church, I guarantee you there's going to help you out.
Well, and how about this? Like we give boxes of books to our parish every year.
Yeah.
For nothing. So you can do that. There
Yeah.
are people who can afford that sort of thing. So, the other lie is I've said it once. One lie is I've said it once. You got to say it 1,000 times in 1,000 ways. Another lie is the architecture doesn't matter. If there's no distinction between the sanctuary and the nave, then the sanctuary is just a place. And in one of these parishes where that priest was very frustrated, there's lay people always running around in the sanctuary. Some of them are reverent, some of them aren't. And it should be well thought out if anyone enters, and they shouldn't enter cavalierly. By the way, just in that parish, the vestments are terrible. They look like they're made by some drunk person in the 70s. Oh, let's match the altar cloth with the vest. It's terrible. It's horrible looking. So it just says this isn't all that important. Good thing, by the way, tabernacle looks great. It's right in the center, in the right place.
Yeah. And if you're limited to what you can do because of the hierarchy or anyone,
do what you can do.
Do what you can do.
Yeah.
Meaning moving announcements out of the pulpit to somewhere
to
else,
the nave, or just through flock note or through an email system, whatever. Give people silence. What a lie is, silence is bad. You have the lie is silence is dead space, and you have to fill it. He talked about Protestantization. One of them is we got to have 4 or 5 hymns at every mass. I mean, can't we just have a little silence?
Mm-hmm.
Can't we just pray? And the fact that we have none means, well, we probably shouldn't be silent. There's always noise in here. This is a noisy place. Most ordinary form masses I go to, noisy. Do I love the people performing the music? Yes. Yeah. In our parish, there's some of the most wonderful, beautiful souls.
And some of those songs, to be totally fair, have brought both of us to tears.
Totally true. But we don't need 5 hymns.
Right.
We need after we receive, especially after receiving communion, we need to have some silence.
Yeah.
And by the way, the church calls for that. Yeah. Right? We just ignore it. We don't follow church teaching, and we think, well, why are things not going the way they should go? So the other lie is we need to fill every moment with noise. Another lie is, we didn't talk about this in depth, but music needs to be accessible to the people, and current to our culture. So at that very mass, I just happened to look around because the music I was listening to, people are wonderful. It's just 60s junk music. And you know how many people were singing in the church? 0. I didn't find one.
That's surprising.
I didn't find one. And I'm like, yeah, of course, it's not inspiring. It's not. And it's contrary to church teaching. What about the church teaches that sacred polyphony and chant to take pride of place? I'm not saying it has to be 100%, but it should be the predominant.
Right.
Just not.
I mean, correct me if you think I'm crazy, but just if you have someone who knows how to play piano and just plays piano beautifully, why not just that?
Well, and that's the thing. I don't understand why it's better to be silent than to have bad music.
No, 100%. And I prefer silence over anything. I mean, I specifically desire the low mass because it's mostly
low
silence.
Mass in the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah, but if we're talking about incremental steps that priests can do to start implementing these things, unfortunately, and this I will say, this may be my perception.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's true for everyone I've seen, but a lot of the music that I have seen over the years feels very performative.
Yeah.
And it should be, there's a reason why there's choir lofts, right? It's not a performance. They're hidden.
The choir loft wrecks the instinct to perform.
It's supposed to assist in the mass.
Yeah.
So maybe one step is, hey, let's just not do lyrics.
Yeah.
Why don't we do, because I'll tell you what, if I had to choose between sung, sometimes heretical hymns, because they do exist in some of these hymnals, or just someone who can actually play an instrument beautifully.
Yeah.
If those are my only choices, give me the instrument beautifully
Yeah.
with no words.
Yeah, and I have to reiterate, our parish, we have some beautiful musicians, wonderful musicians, and I would just, and I, recently we had our pianist wasn't there, and had this opera singer who sang.
Oh, she's incredible.
I just love.
I love
so
that
amazing.
Woman. Yeah, I do too.
And I love her heart. I want her to be there, and I want her to do that. But I would like to say, let's just do one or two lasts, and have some silence so that we can pray. And there are people, by the way, the music helps them to pray. I totally get that. But there's also other people who have I don't know.
I'm very ADHD. If as soon as that music starts, I cannot enter into prayer as many times as I've tried.
I'm the same way.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Gregorian chant is so beautiful. Because if I play Gregorian chant while I pray, I'm locked in.
No, I mean, I have tinnitus, which means a loud ringing in my ears all the time. And the way I deal with it in prayer is I pray when I'm praying in the morning in mental prayer. I listen very low in my headphones. So anyway, any other lies that we needed to call out here? And I just want to say, the last thing I want to say is, well, since maybe not the last thing, I don't know. Laity, you guys have a huge impact on how this all works.
Yeah.
If you get behind your priest, you can buy Devotional Journey into the Mass for everyone in your ordinary form parish. And if you want to buy the equivalent to that, by Romano Guardini's, I think it's How to Prepare for Mass, for the Latin Mass, whatever.
Well, as you said, we have the video series coming up.
Yeah.
Start a small group and go over that video series.
Start a small group and go over both of those books, one from Boniface Hicks and the other from Christopher Carstens. Absolutely. And that'll be, if you're not a subscriber to SpiritualDirection.com, that's how you'll know when the video series is out. It's going to be free, by the way.
Yeah.
Costs us a boatload of money, but it will be free to you because we want to help. We want to help priests. Priests can show it in their parish. You can ask people to do it in their small groups. You can do it on your own in your small groups. You can watch it for yourself, whatever. Read the books. But the laity can do a ton to help serve their priests in this area.
Yeah, it almost, this may be an incorrect statement, but I feel like it almost starts with the laity. Of course, the laity has to be taught and they have to be led. But I think many of these conversations is, we choose to kneel to receive.
Yeah.
I know the conversation around women choosing to veil, and that's a whole different thing that I have no input on, but it's just another example. If you have a friend who you're close with who continues to be loud, and we're not, by the way, never once are we talking about kids being loud in church. That's awesome.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's just not.
Kids being kids, that's actually a very good thing.
Right.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
I should probably say that. But if you have a friend who is talking loudly and you know them well enough and you can go to them and say, hey, man, I'm really trying to pray. This isn't the place. Let's talk about this.
We do this outside. Yeah.
That is going to have a major impact.
Right.
And it's probably honestly going to connect a little bit more, especially if you have a relationship, than if they hear it from the pulpit. But then after they hear it from the pulpit, after you've already intervened, then it's going to stick even more.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the end, I think what's maybe a cap on this whole thing is we need to support our priests. And this show isn't about criticizing priests. No. It's about giving ideas to the priests and the laity about how to change the culture and to get to a place of reverence. How to take ownership of what you should take ownership of priests and laity alike. And realizing that, there are people who succeed in, and I'll say priests and parishes that succeed in this in great measure and become very active and large, by the way, larger usually in their diocese than in the other parishes. And if they can do it, humans are humans, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's just, you got to, as a leader, you got to say, okay, instead of like in this one case where the priest said, well, I've been here forever and, you don't believe, but I do. It's like, well, asking the question, have I done all of these things to help them to believe? Have I asked you extraordinary ministers to discontinue their service because they won't follow my pastoral guidelines?
Yeah, it just, maybe this is the last note. It reminds me of when I was helping guys, overcome pornography and things like that. One of the primary factors they had to understand is that they have trained their bodies to betray them.
Mm-hmm.
When you engage in certain behavior, this is just a psychological, physiological truth. When you engage in certain behavior over time habitually, you train your body to betray you.
And people need to stop being trained to betray Christ.
And that's
wow.
Right. I mean, I've been here for 15 years and nothing's changed. You've trained your congregation to act in a particular way.
And maybe not on purpose.
And most likely not on purpose.
Right.
I would bet money that
it has to be on purpose to solve it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So just maybe that final thought. So again, no condemnation, no judgment. Clearly, hopefully you can hear our love and desire for not just the Lord, but for our priests who we work so hard to support. Hopefully this provides some ideas. And if anyone's listening has any other ideas, and especially things that you may have implemented in your own parish, priest or laity, doesn't matter.
Put it in the comments.
Share
it with other people. Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about it on another show.
Right. Yeah.
And, I'd love also if there's a priest out there or a parish who went from totally irreverent, crazy to beautiful, reverent, and love to interview you and get to know, what you did. Yeah. That would be amazing.
Yeah. All right. Until next time, may the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole and entire, spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.